everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for taking the time to be here today. My name is Arnold Nyamande. I'm a policy manager at BCS, and I am one of your hosts for the Policy Jams alongside Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan Aldridge, Senior Policy Manager here at BCS. This is our third one of these. Arnold and I are your co-hosts, and we're really really pleased that every time we do one of these is getting more popular, and hopefully we're trying to keep them as topical and as engaging as possible. This in particular I know is very close to everybody's heart, as we're going to be talking about cyber security, cyber in general, disinformation, and specifically what's happening in Ukraine and the impacts of that on all of that. So really pleased to have you all here.
Yes, thank you again for taking time to be here. And as Dan said, we do try to keep the conversations topical. And one of the ways we do that is asking you to engage with the hashtag BCS Policy Jams on social media, just so you can prompt yourself and your network to join the conversation to find out what's happening here at BCS. And just moving on to the next slide. Like Dan said, this is the third policy jam, pardon me. We started them in March, and so far I think they've been going quite well. We've had really positive feedback and really positive engagement from you. Thank you. We appreciate that. And in case this is your first one, the goals of our policy jam was to open a channel of communication between us at BCS HQ and you, BCS membership. We wanted you to know what we're working on, what we find exciting, and equally to find out what you're working on, what you find exciting, so that we can try to support each other in our work. These policy jams happen once a month, every second Tuesday of the month at midday. You will find us here. Please do come along. But if for whatever reason you can't, we appreciate people have other commitments. We do record these and we put them online onto our BCS policy and influence page. They are recorded and immortalized on the internet for you to watch at your leisure. And the format of it is that we, Dan and myself, speak. We try to limit our speaking as much as possible because this is your space, your time. So we speak for about 10-15 minutes, and then we open the floor so you can engage with our panel. We always have really, really exciting people to come and talk to you and engage with you. And you can get involved by putting your questions in the chat, like Dan said, and we will get through them in an orderly manner. We find putting it in the chat is just this way for us to regulate and manage, because with hands, sometimes we miss hands. We don't mean to ignore you. So the best way is to put it in the chat, and that way we make sure that we get to everybody's question. And then I'm going to move on to the next slide. Of course, happy International Women's Day. Woohoo, for women, great. How is BCS celebrating International Women's Day? That is the key question, right? So BCS isn't a big employer in this space, but we do try to create and collate original research, insight, and data around women's participation in the IT and digital industries. What we do is we strive to amplify the voices of women in IT and digital, and we have many ways of doing this. For example, our publication of books, magazines, media, and press work, and networks of women within the BCS. For example, BCS Women. BCS Women is a specialist group that is led by some of the amazing women members that we have within the BCS. And what they're doing really great things to support the industry and to support people starting out in their careers. And we hold webinars and podcasts profiling women at all stages of their careers, from early careers graduates to seasoned professionals. There is room for you in the BCS. Come along and join. And so, for example, how we try to support women is we offer information, advice, original insight, and data for women and the industry in general. And we seek to be more representative of the community that we serve for the improvement and the betterment of our industry. And Dan is going to put a link in the chat to a profile piece written by one of our members of staff, Joanna Hamilton, on how we get more women into tech. And then on your screen, I think it's on your right-hand side of the screen, we have an event happening on Monday, the 21st of March, on how can we break the bias in the IT industry. This is one of the many things that we do to try and improve representation and make IT good for society. So what we try to do is we try to ensure that women's voices are represented in conversations like these. So for example, it's not too long ago that BCS would have confidently put forward an all-male panel for an event like today. We are constantly growing and learning and recognizing the error of our ways. So what we're doing, we owe that very much to the women of BCS who help us improve, who offer constructive feedback. And today, with that in mind, today we have a great panel of not exclusively women, some of them are women, a great panel of speakers who are going to talk to us, among other things, about the UK government's approach to cyber and information security, cyber skills, and the UK government's approach. Specifically, is it fit for purpose? And, what are we learning from things that have been unfolding in Ukraine over the past couple of weeks? So I'm going to ask our guests to introduce themselves. And if you could tell us, please, who you are, what's your background, and what do you hope to be able to get out of this session? So if I could start with Lisa, please.
Hi, my name's Lisa Forte. I'm a partner at Red Goat Cybersecurity. I specialize in helping companies prepare for cyber incidents by running simulations. That's sort of what I do professionally. Really excited to be on this panel. There's some amazing people on here, and having looked at some of the prep for it, I think we're going to have a really good discussion. So it's nice to meet you all. Hope you enjoy it.
Thank you, Lisa. Can I move on to Jen, please?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jen Ellis. I'm the VP of Community and Public Affairs at Rapid7, which is a security services and solutions company. I served with Dan on the government experts panel for the government cyber strategy, and I co-chair on the ransomware task force, which means that I've ended up in a situation of talking a lot about attacks originating out of Russia and countries surrounding, quite a lot over the past couple of years. So yeah, looking forward to today's discussion. Thank you very much for including me. Great to be here.
Thank you for being here, Lisa. Can I ask Patrick to introduce himself, please?
Hi, I'm Patrick Burgess. I'm Technical Director and co-founder of Nutborn, which is a managed service provider based out of London. I'm also a member of the BCS's Information Security Steering Group. Really looking forward to talking with the rest of the panel and also hearing some of the questions that come out from the general members and being able to hopefully facilitate a conversation around what's going on at the moment, but also where we're going in cyber and what we can do to improve.
Thank you. Alexi, please.
I'm Alexi Drew. I'm a senior analyst at RAND Europe. I specialize predominantly in the geopolitics of emerging technologies, including cyber, AI, varying forms of autonomy. I'm a recently lapsed academic. As of 6 months ago, I worked at King's College. I was in the Policy Institute out of King's, and previous to that in the Centre of Science and Security Studies. So I did a lot of arms control and the wider geopolitics of what states do and do not do in cyberspace and around emerging tech issues.
Thank you. And last but not least, can I have Dan, please?
Hi, I'm Dan. I'm a cybersecurity consultant for Phone Defend. I've worked in industry for over 20 years, and I've been inside hundreds of different organizations' networks, helping them improve the way they deploy technology and how they improve their cybersecurity postures. I set up with Lisa a couple of years ago a volunteer group, so we've been working with healthcare and looking at broader level cybersecurity challenges than most people focus on. So I've got some insights into stuff that people don't generally look at, because they're looking at their org. I'm looking at all of them. So excited to be here and glad to see everybody.
Great, thanks Dan. Thanks everybody for introducing yourselves. So if we're going to get into some of the questions, so thankfully members, so one of the good things about these policy jams as they gather pace is that people who maybe can't be here or are really on the ball, they've already sent us questions in. So I'll start off with a question, and if we do go in that order that we went from, so Jen first through to Dan. But one of the questions, I think this is actually one from our team, what has struck you as a person working in cyber over the past 2 weeks? so pretty open. But Lisa, if we can go to you.
I actually think for me, the thing that struck me was I live in this world, as so many of us do, where cybersecurity is the most important thing in the world. Security and cybersecurity, digital security, information security, that's all we think about. We live, we breathe it. Those are the threats that we focus on. And I think for me, what sort of really struck me in the last couple of weeks was in the context in which we're seeing this humanitarian crisis unfold. It's relatively unimportant in comparison to these people and the scenes that you're seeing of people sheltering and truly terrified in physical fear of their life, unable to get food, unable to escape. And I think it's really put some things into perspective for me about, you know, the problems that humanitarian issues can face. And I think also the fact that tech can be really beneficial for that. But I've also seen in the last 2 weeks it being a real aggravator of problems. And I think that's also been an eye-opener for me.
Thank you, Lisa. Jen, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would echo actually a lot of what Lisa just said. I think, you know, I was chatting to somebody the other day who is extraordinarily sort of well-informed and has a great perspective on these things. And he was reflecting on the fact that we had a lot of commentary prior to this event around the idea that the sort of the next war would be a cyber war kind of a thing. And we were talking about like, that actually isn't what we're seeing, right? What we're seeing is, and I think we sort of, as Lisa said, we tend to think, those of us who work in the tech sector tend to think in technological terms and prioritize technology, and certainly is a significant enabler, and it does change the dynamics of things. But I think we got so wrapped around that we forgot that, you know, war is essentially first and foremost kinetic, and so the cyber elements of it are just another sort of tool in the arsenal, and we're seeing that play out right now. And I think actually a lot of people in security, if you ask them what surprised them the most over the past 2 weeks, they would probably tell you it's that we haven't seen the level of activity in the cyber domain that we thought we would. That's not to say we won't. And I do want to hasten to say that, because we don't know how this will develop over time, and it's likely that, you know, we might see some of those elements come up. But right now we haven't seen it to the extent that we thought we would, except actually in the other direction, where we've seen a huge sort of swelling from folks in the West and other regions who want to show solidarity with Ukraine and are participating in a sort of you know, volunteer army kind of a way, which is a dynamic that we have not seen in this particular set of circumstances before. You know, we've seen hacktivism before, but we haven't seen it sort of play out quite the way it is right now.
Yeah, thank you. Next, if we go to Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, just following on really from what Jen and Lisa both said. I mean, as Jen just mentioned, you know, we haven't seen play out what you know, the worst. You know, and if you look on any of the social media or the BBC forums and things like that, sometimes, you know, it's pretty doom and gloom, and every company in the world is going to be hacked tomorrow, and that hasn't seemed to happen. It doesn't mean it won't. It seems to be more. People already needed to do the things they need to be doing to protect their environments. You know, there is more confusion. I mean, everything like this that happens, you know, whenever something big global happens, COVID happened, this is happening, you know, that provides a mechanism for people to confuse, and, you know, but the same attacks are being used on the businesses that are coming in. It's just sending out some misinformation to different people and preying on people's sort of, you know, worry is what seems to be happening. It doesn't seem to be new attack mechanisms or things like that. That seems to be happening generally. Most of that seems to be constrained mainly to Ukraine and what's happening over there. And as Jen and Lisa both said, you can see it playing out on the TVs. You know, it was going to be this cyber warfare, and it's not. There are bombs raining down on buildings and civilians over there. And yes, the websites are getting hacked, and yes, the odd things happening here and there, and yes, maybe a bit of personal information is getting leaked from the odd ministry over there. But to the people in Ukraine right now, that's kind of a side effect to everything, and really, The rest of us just need to carry on with, being sensible about cyber, making sure we're aware and making sure we're doing our due diligence and moving stuff and keeping a watch for seeing if that escalates and seeing if it moves in a different way. But that's the same message we've been giving to people for like a year or so, and people have kind of, certainly small to medium businesses, has been sitting there with their ears closed and not really wanting to listen to that. So that problem hasn't changed massively, and the problem in Ukraine is different. It needs to be attacked on lots of different ways, but cyber is a very small portion of it.
Thanks, Patrick. Alexei, do you want to come in?
Yeah, there's a lot to kind of echo that has been said already, but I think I can kind of bring a slightly different perspective. So I'm probably the least technical person on this panel, but I come to this kind of work from the geopolitical side with the cyber lean. So conflict was the kind of foundation of my research and work, and then cyber became the component on top. And the last 2 weeks for me, this has effectively has been the kind of the clashing point of vastly different theories of what cyber conflict in the modern world would look like. And the reason why those have remained theories to this point is that although we've seen attacks within this, and offensive and defensive within the cyber domain in all sorts of different theaters of conflict for the last 20, 30 years, realistically, in some form or another, we have never seen a conflict specifically like this. And there are a couple of reasons what I mean by that. We've never seen what we would call peer to near peer conflict that has or could have a cyber component. So that's unique. We've never seen one in this particular regional domain with a cyber component. The closest parallels are really Estonia and Georgia and a few other instances like that, but they were arguably like precursors. They never reached the scale or the level or the potential geopolitical complexity that this particular example has. Now, historically, it's interesting because the ideas that we've had that raised before, that I think Jen and Lisa and Patrick to another extent have raised, is that we had this expectation of a cyber war as this distinct, purely digital thing that can cause similar harm or outputs to kinetic attacks, but we're not seeing that. That's a very distinctive theoretical camp within my kind of area of work, and it has been for a very long time. However, there are a lot of us who are, I would argue, kind of in the emerging career to early mid-career people like myself, who have long argued that we need a more critical concept of what cyber war is. In the fact, as Jen mentioned, cyber is an alternative means of achieving kinetic effect. Now, one of the theories that I think I can't say whether it's completely accurate or not, but I think has a lot of water to hold, is as to why we haven't seen significant actions within the cyber domain for this conflict, is that why use an alternative means of getting what kinetic can get when you're using kinetic? Like, why turn off a power plant with a wiper when you can just blow up the power plant? Because you're already there. The resources, why double it up? If you don't think you need it, there's no point. So there's already, and those dynamics, these kinds of doctrine meeting reality, we've not seen that before. And I think the 2 weeks for me, this has been a massive turning point in how we're taking theory and testing against reality. And I think a lot it needs to be unpacked on what that looks like.
Thank you, Alexei. Dan, Card, other Dan?
So my view is probably a little bit different. I think what I've seen, I haven't slept very much for 2 weeks. Normal in this space. And obviously it's horrendous, right? Like from an intelligence gathering point of view and everything that's happening, it's awful. I think some of the things that aren't particularly necessarily new in some circles is there's a lot of talk about cyber warfare and cyber bullets and cyber weapons, and really it's a bit of a joke. Anyone that follows me online will know that I'm quite commonly going around showing my alternative view of what cyber is. I think some of this is around, I don't think people quite understand what the word cyber means. I think they've got an incredibly Hollywood view on Jason Bourne-esque activity. They think you can conduct C&E on a dime and just like start sending packets and breaking into networks. It doesn't work that way. I don't think they understand the information warfare aspects to this. And like looking at like general internet activity, like we have seen some things like the Ukraine cyber army standing up and asking for people to join in. Now, that's new in its overtness and its like specific statement from a nation state. But if we look at hacktivism, if we look at criminal activity, if we look at intelligence gathering, it's not particularly new. So I think there's a real like, and I'm glad this sort of echoes in a reverse way. I'm glad some of the stuff that we talk about in industry, probably more in an echo chamber, is hopefully now going out to a wider audience. You cannot like the information warfare aspect to this, the propaganda, the misrepresentation, the use of fake materials, laughably so, with some of the stuff that's coming out of RU at the minute. There is a psychological impact, and I talk to people all over the world, and you can see people not understanding what the truth is. And I think that element is the key element that people don't talk about. I operate in what I would say is a technology first with people operators space, generally speaking. But this is really about people that happen to use technology, and what the impacts of cyber war and information war and how that actually looks in reality come across. So hoping people start to understand that doing multi-year campaigns of disinformation, of conducting C&E in ways which are very much beneath the radar, can be used from a nation state warfare perspective. And it's not necessarily like, oh, okay, we're going to run a DOS attack against this target, or you know, you're going to spin up all these activities occurring or send some cyber weapons. It doesn't work that way. And I think hopefully there's some understanding being learnt by people that you can't just cyber gun yourself into a situation. So that's my take on what I've seen in the last 2 weeks.
Thanks, Dan. A quick question from Paul McKenna. I'm unsure if it's that Paul McKenna. What is C&E?
Computer network exploitation. Computer
network exploitation, right? Thank you. There was a question that has been raised in the chat. 2 seconds, by Philip Virgo. Philip says, how important was the hijacking of mainstream Russian news broadcasts to tell the Russian public what their government doesn't want them to know? So I mean that doesn't make sense to me necessarily, but I'm just wondering if anybody's got anything to come back on that.
I can start on that one, Dan, if you'd like.
Great, please do.
So it's important to understand the nature of media ownership and private public media in Russia, and the sources of information that are generally there versus the sources that are now there. So there's a state before and a state after. The state before was already pretty restricted, quite frankly, like extremely restricted. The state now is even more so. But I think what's clear is that there is a significant generation, and it's a large proportion of the population, considering Russia is a top heavy in terms of age population, that get most of their media and their information, not just about Russia, but global affairs, through heavily state-controlled television. So that is a source that effectively has meant that the narrative within Russia and that population is completely controlled by the Russian state. So any ability to subvert that is likely to cause some consternation. The problem obviously is we don't have much on the way of judging how much of an impact it's had. Information operations and counter-influence operations, so you might call it strategic communications, is incredibly hard to measure the impact of. You can measure the reach in technical terms, like how many people have you impacted, but there is almost no way without very in-depth interviews and before and after comparisons to work out what did that particular intervention do. So the cynic in me would say that it probably caused a little bit of unrest and interest, but it probably did not last. This is a very long-running, well-structured attempt to essentially shape the beliefs of a whole population, and a one-off for even a short period of time is not going to undermine that quickly.
Now, I can just add to that, actually. I also think I completely 100% agree. And I'm maybe also a cynic in the sense that I don't think it's had much, if any, effect. I think, as I said earlier, the pulling out of social media platforms, Netflix, other tech companies from that geography has probably made the control of the narrative easier, not actually done what we think it was going to do. And in an ideological way, it would have changed everything. I don't think that's reality. But I also think we've got to be aware of the fact that when we discuss misinformation, when we discuss even, whether it's propaganda or whether it's just wishful thinking, and wherever that sits on that spectrum, it flows both ways. So I also think there is a narrative coming our direction saying, look at how much impact we're having in Russia. Look at this one image that shows this. And we've also got to be very careful from our perspective that we don't go, oh, look, you see what we're doing is having this huge effect, because in this situation, that information, that inaccurate information, can flow both ways. And I don't think we're as good at judging potentially fake photographs or fake information or whatever it is that play into our narrative. We're very happy to accept. When it looks like it's come from the other side, we're more critical of it, but actually both are really dangerous because they may not be fact.
I think that's really important when you look at who would have been viewing those stations as well, right? So, the people, we look at stuff that comes up in our vision and what we see that looks either fits or doesn't fit our narrative and the way it goes, and therefore we judge that based on what we're seeing. These state media, which was very, very controlled anyway, it gets hacked for a short period of time, some stuff turns up on it that doesn't really fit with the narrative that's already going out through that. The people who are reading and watching that are probably going to maybe dismiss that a little bit and just carry on with what they're already seeing, because it doesn't fit with the narrative that they're in and the echo chamber that they're already hearing information from. So it's really, I think in these propaganda wars, it's so difficult, as Dan mentioned, to work out what you can trust and what you can't trust. And it's made even worse by the platforms themselves, which sort of validate what you are seeing by, putting you in your own echo chamber. If you're watching something on Facebook and you stop more for longer than 30 seconds on a video, you're going to get more videos that seem to show that information. And then suddenly you find yourself believing something completely different to somebody you may know and trust and like, and that just happens they have been shown completely different things on their platforms to what you're being shown. So it's really difficult to get factual information and know that information is good. And that can even be seen by the fact that some of the live feeds for people like, the BBC, the Guardian, quite well-respected media organizations, have had to come out and recorrect the information. There was I think it was Vladimir Klitschko or the other one, where they'd already put some information out. Associated Press picked up that media, they ran with it, and then like 2 hours, 3 hours later, they were having to apologize for that and roll that back because their information was then wrong. Because there's so much information flying around that even media organizations that we can consider respectable are picking up information that's misinformation and then reporting that, and that just overemphasizes the situation. It just goes around in circles.
I would actually theorize, and I don't know, that it actually has the potential to do harm. Because I think that when you are looking at a population that has been subject to propaganda for, and like, don't get me wrong, every population is subject to propaganda, but like the Russian state is pretty good at propaganda, and you're looking at a population that's been subject to it for so long, and the tone of it is very much around how the West misrepresents what's going on, and how we overstep, and how we think we can police the rest of the world. And so I would actually speculate that, and it is speculation, I don't know, but I think if you have a situation where you have people who hack into media that people rely on, that they watch every day, to sort of force images on people, I would imagine that actually could create a backlash in the population that you're trying to influence, where that population then goes, this is exactly what our government's been telling us. Look at how these people behave. They have no right to do this. And they're just force feeding us stuff that is lies. And I think it's super easy for the Russian government to keep that narrative going, to say that this is just part of a campaign, a disinformation campaign. So I think it has the potential to be harmful. And I think, and I'm just going to like use this to piggyback into a sort of bigger issue here around the sort of idea of hacktivism, right? Which is like, I think there's so much good intent here. And I understand that like, you're sitting at home and you're watching the news and you want to do something to help people desperately. And you want to feel like you can do something and take action. Nobody likes to feel powerless, particularly when you're watching something that you view as injustice and that's creating this huge humanitarian crisis. I think the problem is that you don't have all the information. And so it's so easy to like jump on a bandwagon, get involved, do a thing. and you don't have all the information. You don't know what other governments are doing, for example, where they have like very finely tuned, we hope, intelligence campaigns that are, you know, sort of multi-year campaigns. And you don't know how your actions are going to impact that. And so I do think, I mean, I think, you know, as you look at the question of hacktivism, I think there's a sort of bigger issue at stake here around what the potential impact is. And again, I say this, I feel like a traitor to my own community saying it, because I know that the intent is so good behind it, but I do really worry about the potential unintended negative consequences of what's being done.
Can I just jump in there though? I'm like,
yeah, tell me I'm wrong and I'm a traitor to security.
Counter view, right? So the first thing that I picked up on there, like, I completely agree. People should not be running around acting like idiots, right? That is like a pretty simple thing.
That's just your default.
Yeah, my default thing is like, don't be a dick. Like, assuming that things are happening in this space. So like, if you look at Russians like Doctrine, it's going back to, you know, the year 2000 sort of period. You know, this is not normal in terms of Western mindset from an information wars point of view. The argument about people doing stuff or not doing stuff and it causing a problem, I kind of think is personally irrelevant. If you look at what happens on the internet on a daily basis, that everyone's hacking everything anyway. So the fact there's more social media presence around stuff, I'm like, whatever, I don't care. Like, if your security posture can't sustain a group of people getting together on you, it's not really a security posture. So I kind of think from that point of view, yes, you know, like I said, people shouldn't be breaking the law, people should be acting responsibly. Yes, we don't know the impact of anything, but then our governments don't know the impact of things either. When we look at the information wars and you look at the outcomes that are here, we're in an outcome, and we're in an outcome to failure to protect against this space, right? There's lots of talk around cybersecurity, of network defenses, of, oh my God, all the worst things can happen, like a hacker can get in and blow up my kettle or Lisa's microwave. But what we're really seeing is the impact on disinformation on, like, at mass, and we've seen it. There's evidence of it. We've seen it in elections. We can see it on the population. I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but I sit in different social media channels as different personalities, right? I'm not me everywhere. And I go and try and experience the world from other perspectives. And this stuff has a real impact on people. I talk to people and my friends, I've got friends all over the world. And some of them, you can see that they're impacted by the information warfare space. Do I think people are making an impact in a positive and negative way? Yes, both. Because the fact that we don't know isn't a reason to not act. I think if you look at the situation in Russia, you have a, you know, I didn't design how countries work and I'm not an expert in geopolitics, but you've got a group of people who are being led by someone who has invaded another country. It is people that make a government, not a government that make people. And that might be a Western view on the world, but I think that people should speak up and people should act appropriately, because failure to do anything and failure to speak out against corruption, against crime, against essentially evil in the world is how we get to this scenario we're in. At least that's my perspective. So I'm with Jen, and I'm also not at the same time. I think that people should be acting upon what they see in the world. Our democracy relies upon people doing that.
Well, if we can draw a line under that for a second, because we've got many questions and we've got through one, I think, although I think we've probably managed to cover quite a lot of the content. So there was a question that came through that started a bit of chat in the typed chat. So Olu Odeniyi, hopefully I've done that as some justice. Does the panel think deepfakes will become an increasing issue within the disinformation cybersecurity arena? Alexi, I know that you'd commented on that. Do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, happy to. I had a fantastic event in Geneva in the brief time we were allowed to travel at the end of last year, where UNIDIR, which is a think tank attached to the UN that effectively looks at non-proliferation and arms control, funded by various UN governments, was specifically looking at deepfakes and the implications on geopolitics and security, both traditional, what we'd call kinetic warfare issues, but also human security issues. And I think I put in the chat the link of the report that came out of that, if anyone's interested in reading. But the general takeaway, and some of the things I really want to raise, is that, so the chat has talked about how some of these deepfakes and the technology behind it can be incredibly convincing. I'm sure we've all watched the second version of Luke Skywalker. I'm sorry for the spoilers. The first one was a little bit horrific, but the second attempt was far better. But the point that I raised when I was in Geneva, because I do some consulting work with OSINT for ICC work, International Criminal Court work. And what we tried to put across is that the technology doesn't have to produce high fidelity imagery or video or audio or text, because those all can be deepfaked, I should be pointing out, to have an impact, to make people believe what is not true. It just needs to be good enough. And in certain contexts, that's a far lower bar than others. So most footage that we get out of conflict zones, for example, is not filmed on a 4K camera. It's filmed on a mobile phone, which can be a mobile phone current generation, therefore, not too bad, or quite an old one. It's much easier, funnily enough, to create believable fake footage on already poor quality material. And that already has been for quite some time used in mis and disinformation campaigns of all sorts of types. There's a great one quite some time ago where the Chinese got accused of trying to essentially justify a large railway project across an area of natural beauty. And they photoshopped in to this train line a load of pictures of like wild animals as if it was a perfect convocation of nature and technology. But it was entirely nonsense. It was very badly photoshopped when anyone knew what they were looking at, but it was believable enough. And that is effectively what the problem is here, is the deepfakes aren't a thing over the horizon. There are other problems associated with very high fidelity deepfakes, yes. But the problem of faked media that's believable enough is here now. That's not a 2015 or not 2025 issue. That's a 2021, 22 issue.
Absolutely. I think when you've also got disinformation going around anyway, then you end up in claim and counterclaim as well. So people are putting videos out and photos out. As Alexi says, it doesn't have to be high quality, and then someone counterclaims that's not true. And then your general public and people who aren't technical haven't got a chance. Even most people in the technical industry don't necessarily know how to distinguish what's a deepfake, what's not a deepfake, and they don't have enough time or thought process to do that either. And most of us are scrolling through things and look at them for 30 seconds and move on. If you have to take every photo and put it through some kind of analyzer and try and work out if it's deepfake, I don't think that is accessible to the general public anyway at the moment. And even if it was, then you've got this whole scenario of, does it always get it right and to tell you whether it's a deepfake or not a deepfake? And then are some photos and videos that are real going to be classed as deepfakes when actually they're real? And I find that technology quite terrifying, to be fair. I mean, word and then the spoken word and people's opinions you can take as a pinch of salt, and you can take the general mass sort of feeling of the public and say, okay, that's roughly the truth because enough people have got enough opinions there. With photos, we kind of almost take them as granted, and we take one photo and assume that's true, and that is really difficult because people don't go and look for second opinions on photos and videos, but they do on sort of general spoken word. So I think we need to get, I don't know how to counter that in some respects, but it is quite a terrifying thought.
I think as well, just on that note, like if you look at there's a photo of some supposedly NATO equipment being boosted by bots, etc. Again, this is another impact of cyber into this information space. I mean, they're laughable. They are like ridiculous, like to the point, obviously it's a bit difficult to say, but like we had people from NATO check. But we're looking at it's a 2007 laptop, but it's already, the damage can be done already. So how do you counter that? And it's almost like Alexi said, like it doesn't need to be good. It just needs to have enough people who aren't critical thinkers looking at it. And as Lisa said earlier, it's a really difficult space with regard to if you shut everyone down into certain networks and certain echo chambers. If you do that at a country level and you do it for 20 years, how do you combat that? Especially when the narratives are mirroring, I'll give an example, like, if they mirror things that your countries have said when they've gone to a war, and then that's used as a justification inside a country's echo chamber, huge problem because then you're a hypocrite. And if people are claiming things and you're saying, well, they're not true, it's very difficult to explain to someone that's already bought into a belief. And I think like the technology community, at least I can only speak for my sort of areas that I surf around in, we naturally try and rip stuff apart, especially the hacker community. We don't believe anything. We fail a million times. If it's not a graph and some science showing it, we're pretty skeptical, but that's so not normal. So I think for most people, and I've spoken to family members about this stuff, they're terrified of it.
Can I just also add that the one thing that I don't think's been mentioned is that we've talked about deepfakes as in faked photographs, Photoshop photographs, videos, etc. But I think the other danger of it that doesn't get discussed is that it gives a deniability to genuine photographs that haven't been photoshopped. So then you can say that's been edited, that's been altered. You can cast doubt over an actual, something that's actually factually correct, and you can throw doubt on that, which is also, in my opinion, equally dangerous.
Okay, if we move slightly on, I think we've got just over 15 minutes left, and there's a couple of key questions that we want to look at. So what I'm kind of sensing is this is move to kind of act. People want to act, people want to do something that's useful. One of the things obviously associated with a policy jam is that we want to influence policy. So there's a question around the UK government's approach to cybersecurity and the broader kind of ecosystem of that. One of the questions that we probably should ask is are the UK government's plans fit for purpose? Do they do what we need to do? And has the past 2 weeks and the events unfolding in Ukraine, do they mean that the government should maybe do things differently? So I don't know if anybody wants to come in on that. Alex, hands up, I can see.
Yeah, I'll have a quick stab. So I'll stab at one part of it and then step back and let others jump in. So in the conflict space, in terms of doctrine, there is a very common doctrinal position in how states design cyber to fit within conflict and escalation pathways, as we call them. And it seems specific, but unfortunately it's purposefully not. We call it strategic ambiguity. The idea being that in order to try and ensure that your adversary stays below an acceptable threshold, you express that there is a threshold, but you don't tell them where it is. The idea being that they'll be so risk averse that they'll purposely stay far below where a normal rational actor would believe that threshold to be. Now it's not just the UK that has that policy. It's a policy of NATO, for one, since the Cardiff summit back in 2009-ish, I think. Don't quote me on that. Dates are hard on the fly, but effectively, this is one of those things that's being tested right now. It's worked. I say worked. It's sort of worked to date. But the problem with grey zone conflict or conflict below the threshold is that until you state specifically where that threshold is, it's just like to keep going up and up and up. Now, the issue with here is, and I'm sure there has been some thought, but there hasn't been any statement as to have we actually got a very clear idea of where that line is, and what do we do if that line is pushed? And I'm not sure we've reached that yet.
Thanks, Alexi. Anybody else want to jump in?
I think we talked about this in the ISSG, and we've been talking, obviously, Dan, about this with regards to the latest consultation around the cyber strategy. It seems to be highly focused on certifying professionals in the cyber industry, which is still a kind of vague term. And there's a couple of things which are not worrying, but I mean, better standards across the industry can't be a bad thing, right? You know, if we can be better at what we're doing and we can make sure that people are giving sound advice, that's got to be a useful thing. At the moment, there's very little bar to entry in what we do. Anyone can say that they do cyber or they do IT or they do anything like that. And the general public and general businesses have to kind of take that with a pinch of salt. And for most SMEs, and this is something I'm no more involved in, small and medium enterprises, barely can afford the advice in the first place. And when they get that advice, they certainly can't afford to double check it with somebody else and check that they're getting sound advice. So I think a lot of this comes down to how is it enforced? I think it runs the risk, of we certify people and they have to pay a lot of costs to be certified, and businesses have to be certified to give cyber. That's going to drive costs up potentially of what cyber is, which makes it potentially more out of reach of businesses. So I don't I still think we have to do it, but I think we have to think how we counter that, how we make sure that advice is available to the masses, not just to sort of the corporate enterprises who kind of have some of that advice already there and have the money to be able to check that the advice they're getting is correct. I think the other thing is that they're trying at the moment, from what I'm seeing, to go down this cyber professional route. And in my opinion, that misses the fact that what about the rest of IT? You know, are we just saying that nobody else can talk about cyber or give advice on cyber or do anything about that? So I think you need to regulate. If you're going to do that, it needs to be wider thought out, and then that brings a ton of problems with it as well. So I think improving standards is good. I mean, that can't be a bad thing, but I think there's a lot of questions around how that gets implemented, how that gets enforced, and who can actually be involved in that, which we don't necessarily know the answers to yet and need to be answered before we sort of, you know, ad hoc roll into sort of having cyber certified personnel and nothing else, and no other thoughts of it. So yeah, it's a difficult topic, but ultimately giving business a way of verifying that the advice they're getting is good has got to be a goal of what we're trying to achieve here.
I think also that I did my master's in maritime law and international law many years ago. I won't declare how many years ago, a lot. And one of the things that kept coming up time and time again, all these great ideas at UN level, international level, were brilliant, but the problem was they never had any teeth. And you can have all the regulation in the world. You can have some really great prohibitions. You can have some really great ideas of how you're going to regulate a sector. But if you have no teeth, if you have no ability for that to bite and actually be enforceable, then it's ultimately just words. And that is essentially not really making any improvement. We see this with tick box exercises in cyber all the time. If there's actually no way of really measuring success and really objectively saying you have achieved this or you haven't, it's the same problem. It's just words. And I think that's the danger that we have, both with regards to this conflict and humanitarian crisis, but with cyber more generally, is that a lot of regulations have been really well thought out, taken a long time to come into fruition, and then have no way of biting and being enforced. And so therefore, it's just been a wasted exercise.
I think I'd say, I mean, I think I agree with everything everyone said on this space as well. I think that one of the points I think is important to get across is cybersecurity versus cyber defense are two different subjects. And I think if we're going to look at how we defend as a country and as allies, I think people need to start thinking in terms of cyber defense at country levels. And I think that traditional approaches to security don't necessarily defend against the threat landscape. And if you look at the outcomes you're seeing today, I think that's evidence of that being true.
I'll just, I mean, I agree with everything everyone said before, and I'll say I work with a lot of different governments on cyber policy, and the UK is very active. You know, as I look at them in comparison with other governments, the UK is very, very, very focused on cyber issues and cyber policy and cyber norms and driving awareness and building programs to get more people engaged in different ways. And actually like is doing a lot, because the UK government sees the digital space as a space that it really wants to lead in internationally. I think as we look at the issue that we've been talking about today, the conflict, we do have to sort of separate that out, how we think about policy responses to that versus the general policy responses to cybersecurity or cyber defense. I think, you know, at the beginning of this conversation, a number of people commented that the guidance to companies hasn't changed. The things that you do to protect yourself are the same things that we've been recommending you do to protect yourself for a while. That hasn't changed. What's changed is the potential for the risk level, because we believe that there's a chance of a lot more activity, although again, that hasn't necessarily emerged and is visible for everyone right now. It's keeping Dan awake, and a few and some others. But I think in terms of what the government thinks of when they talk about cyber resilience, they have, like DCMS has so many different lines of inquiry on this at the moment and activity. I mean, you know, yeah, we talked about the professionalization consultation they have open. They have 2 other consultations in cybersecurity open right now. And like that's actually quite a lot. To have 3 running concurrently on cybersecurity is kind of a big deal, and a piece of legislation that's going through approvals, and so I think the government is very focused on the topic of cyber resilience and is looking at all different aspects. Now, I'm not going to tell you that I think any of them are a silver bullet, which is why I think they're pursuing so many different strands, because they recognize there is no silver bullet, as we always like to say in security. I don't think I've been on a panel when it hasn't come up yet. Maybe I'm the one who always says it. So there's a whole bunch of different stuff going on, and it will move at whatever pace it moves, which, for the government, I mean, will take a while. It won't particularly impact the outcomes of the conflict. The things that they look at from a policy point of view from the conflict are much more the stuff that we've been hearing about in the news around sanctions, right? Rather than cyber policy. So I think it's important to note that the UK government is super active on this in this area on policy, but that it probably isn't going to make a huge difference to the current conflict.
Thank you, everybody. That seems like a natural pause. Did anybody else have anything else before we move on to another question? We have a question that takes us back to the kind of disinformation question and the questions around Ukraine. And I think it's in the last 7 minutes that we've got, I think if we want to focus on some practical actions and some things that people might be able to do, or and this doesn't have to be specifically around Ukraine, it can be generally. But one of the questions that we've had directly is what can be done by, for instance, international bodies like NATO to counteract the disinformation war? That's that specific question. I don't know if anybody wants to come in on that. I can see Alexi's hand. We'll go to Alexi, and then Lisa was nodding as well. So
no, I was just cheering on Alexi, to be honest, because I could just listen to her for like days. So.
Any mention of NATO, and I feel that I need to kind of get involved. So NATO has had a very long established, if you like, research body and counter group that works in information operations. They're based out of Latvia, which is the Center of COE Stratcom, so Center of Excellence for Strategic Communications. It was actually my last trip prior to the first lockdown for their annual conference. So that you've got to realize that we're talking about information operations now as if it's a brand new thing. It isn't. Information operations is as old as information, arguably, and as old as states have had access to means to shape information. And if there are any states with experience of that in the modern context and how it's evolved, it's the Baltic states and the Nordic states, and Taiwan, I should also point out. So there are plenty of regional context that can give you the different flavors and perceptions on it. What can NATO do to stop mis and disinformation? Absolutely nothing. You can't stop it. NATO certainly can't. But what you can do is minimize its impact and push back. There's a significant ethical question of whether we should conduct influence operations, what they should look like. Is there a good and ethical kind of influence operation? And this is a question that honestly keeps my head in knots a lot of the time. But in terms of what you can do, the strategic communications coming out of Ukraine and the US and the UK has been a distinct change in previous TAC. If you look at how we responded to the use of a biological agent in Salisbury, for example, or you look at how the US responded to Russian misinformation during Estonia and Georgia and the US presidential elections, it was completely different to what we're seeing now. You're seeing the UK security services coming out of the shadows and actively, rather than allowing Russia to shape the narrative, preemptively undermining potential narrative hooks that might be used in information operations. So saying this attack is potentially going to take place, it's not carried out by Ukraine, but we have evidence to suggest it will be happening. Suddenly you can't build a narrative around that because the timeline is pretty clear that this has already been released. You can't then switch it about after the fact. We've not seen that before. It's almost as if that there has been some lessons learned by NATO and allied NATO states. And I'm saying that really cynically because after the last 8 years of looking in this space, it's very rare that I can say that. But I think that we are seeing it. The ethical one is important though. And this comes back to a point that Lisa made really early on, is that there are some pieces of information that we come across on social media that we instantly want to believe. And I say we as in I assume the kind of people in this room, but it would be naive to suggest that the information that we're seeing, including that produced specifically by Ukraine right now, is all accurate, because they are in a war for their existence. All cards are on the table. That's what war in real terms looks like, which means that they will be using the same tricks that have been used by their aggressors before. And I would argue, now is not the time to critique that. Now is not the time to answer those questions. Now is the time to work out what that means and how we can help. But that's my try and put a positive spin on the end of a complex ethical set of questions.
And I think that actually, from a usual person, normal person's perspective, it can be actually simpler. And I think it can be about how you react to a piece of information and looking at how your reaction could tell you how accurate or inaccurate that could be. So for instance, I read a really brilliant piece that was written by a journalist who works for The Economist. I don't think it was published by The Economist. And they talked about the capturing of this nuclear power plant by Russia, and the argument that perhaps that was done partly, at least, to invoke fear and get to the front page of a lot of media outlets in the UK and across Europe, to cause fear and drum up fear in the population, and how actually by proliferating that message, we could be doing their work for them, and by driving that fear and escalating that. And I do think that one of the things that we've always talked about is, if you read something and it makes you feel incredibly angry or incredibly fearful or incredibly emotional and spikes that emotional level within you, it's probably worth questioning, because by and large, a lot of the information that we see doesn't do that. So I think that for normal people is a good measuring stick, maybe, of things.
Educating, as Lisa says, that just kind of agree and echo that, we can educate people better as to what disinformation is and to check information. It's really difficult to say just use this source, because that's almost making it worse. You go, just use the BBC. Well, no, they have their own sort of biases and problems, but we have a lot of different sources. We're lucky in this country, and we have a lot of different areas, and but ultimately we need to educate the public to take information and check information with multiple places and multiple sources. And if they're finding inconsistencies in what they're seeing and the reporting and the way it goes, then they should doubt that and start to question that and start to further investigate and do that. And this isn't related just to Ukraine. I mean, it's obviously is Ukraine right now. Anyone that has had a child recently, or anyone that has done these things, you go online, you can find information that will support any view about having a child and how you should raise a child and what you should do with a child. The problem with the internet is that you can put any opinion on it, and it is almost like, and it's very easy nowadays to create a website that looks believable and has the information on it. So yeah, you've got to, and as we're saying, low bar to entry in IT, almost zero bar to entry of putting a blog up on the website, making it on the internet, and making it look viable, and making you portraying in words that what you're talking about and that you are an authority on a subject, and especially if you don't go and check that. So yeah,
Patrick, I'm going to have to stop you there, because believe it or not, we are out of time. That went super fast. I think we could definitely keep chatting, but we've come to the end of it. So apologies for cutting you off there, Patrick. But
no problem.
I think that was my fault, because I was really interested in what was going on, and the chat is going a little bit ridiculous in terms of engagement, but we'll capture that. This will all be recorded and posted online as soon as we can. I know Claire, our PR manager, our press manager, is going to be looking at some of this to form it into some words to put out there. So we'll make sure that that's okay with all the speakers, obviously, in advance, to make sure that we're not putting anybody's words in anybody's mouth. But that's been amazing. Thank you so much for your time, and we will be in touch, and maybe we can reconvene at a later date when we find out a bit more what's going on. But thank you, everybody. Thank you, all the participants as well.
Thank you very much. Cheers,
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Dan.
Bye.
Thanks, Arnoldus.